get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down.
And welcome aboard, Kneecaps Nation. We are flying into the sun here on Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Brogar, that's me. Happy to be joined, as always, by the man himself, Phil Byrne. And Phil, it's like a different person I'm talking to right now. You're in a different background, or you're using different technology. I'm kind of liking this look that we're heading into the regular season with here.
Yeah, decided to change things up a little bit. Hopefully this is going to have some higher quality audio. I know we don't really have the video feed, but hey, you know what? It looks like it's working a little better there. But folks, Vince, you alluded to it. Like, we are here. We can thankfully put that preseason behind us.
Yeah,
get to what we want with this roster and actually talk about the Lions at Lambeau here to kick things off for our 2025 season in just a matter of days now.
Yeah, by the time you get this podcast dropped to your device, we're going to be inside 2 weeks from that first game between the Lions and the Packers to start the regular season. We're going to be getting actual regular season NFL games about 10 days from now. So It's going to be getting going on us real quick here. But we won't put the cart before the horse too much. There's still a lot that needs to take place between now and then. The biggest hurdle that we need to surpass is roster cutdowns. So we're going to make that the centerpiece of our episode here on Kneecaps for Breakfast. And then next week, you're definitely not going to want to miss that as you're heading back from Labor Day weekend holiday, getting the kids ready to go back to school if that applies to your school district. Some kids are already in school, but I know a lot of people still don't come back to regular K through 12 school until after the Labor Day holiday. So you're definitely not going to want to miss next week because we're going to do our full-on season preview, but we still have a lot to get to here on this episode. Number one, though, Phil, is just kind of putting a bow on the preseason that was. And I know it's because I have a lot of things going on in my own life that's kind of making wheels spin a little bit faster than they usually do. But, boy, does it seem like that preseason and the whole training camp, as it were, just kind of flew by this year? Or am I just sort of just on a different time clock than everybody else?
No, I think you're absolutely right. You know, like, I think having that extra week, getting training camp going a little bit earlier, I think maybe we were just like predisposed to think that this was going to take a long time getting through preseason, but it never does. August always seems to be one of the fastest months that we just absolutely fly through. And to no one's surprise, once again, here we are at the end of August and looking Labor Day, square in the face here to wrap out the month. So it flew by. I think it was also a really strange kind of layout of how they had the games too, where, we had the Hall of Fame game in Canton, we had one road game, and then we had 2 back-to-back home games, neither of which I was actually able to even go to.
Not that you missed much.
No. So it just preseason football kind of came and went. I don't lose sleep over it, I guess.
No. So I guess my thinking is, and I know I sound like a broken record because I've been saying the same thing week after week since we got this thing going about 4 weeks ago, is you just need to be real careful with what you see and take from the preseason because it's almost kind of like the point system and who's lies in anyway. It's all made up and the points don't matter. So you are sort of left to sort of draw your own conclusions. So here's what we do know. The Lions, in their 4 games, they went 1-3. It was a blowout in the Hall of Fame game against the Chargers. Game 2 was that one road game that Phil mentioned, and that one was cut short after, let's call it what it is. 3 quarters were played, and then the other quarter wasn't played, essentially, because of the severe injury to safety Maurice Norris. The Lions and Falcons sort of stood around for half a quarter before the game was called. So the Lions were credited with a 17-10 victory in that one. More of a back-and-forth game in the third preseason game between the Lions and the Dolphins at Ford Field. That one came down to the final seconds. And the final game of the preseason was just this past weekend against the Texans at Ford Field. And that was a game that was, aside from a fairly competitive first few drives where the teams traded punts and then traded touchdowns. It was pretty much all Houston at that point. So 1-3 is the record. Did not see anybody that looks to be an established player from years past or ones that are without question going to be a heavy hitter on this year's team. So, Phil, what did you take from this preseason and training camp season as a whole? And what did you learn about this squad as we are, again, less than 2 weeks away from kickoff?
Yeah, that for the most part, Brad Holmes seems to get a good portion of his draft picks to be contributors, maybe not necessarily outright stars or necessarily the all pros that we have, been able to see under his watch. But um, I think his draft picks are fine. I think where this roster, normally it would be so challenging for some of these guys to make this team. But whatever this ambulance squad is, specifically on defense, now offense wasn't too great either. But that game against the Texans, I'm not quite sure who was playing, who was still in position to make this team. That was an outright embarrassment. The passing numbers that the Texans quarterbacks put together, those backups, of course, not C.J. Stroud.
Hell, Graham Mertz had the best game of his life, and that's considering he played at Wisconsin and at Florida in some big games. He probably played better against the Lions over the weekend than he did all throughout his college career.
And who was the other? Caden Slovis. I think he was one of these guys.
Another guy who was from USC and transferred around the portal a little bit. And, some guys who were just so collegiate quarterbacks are out there looking amazing in some preseason mop-up action.
To get back to Brad Holmes here in the draft picks, I think the thing that stood out to me was just the fact that he really swung and missed on Hendon Hooker. I know we're going to get into how we want to draw up this team. Listen, I understood there was going to be some rust with this guy, knowing where he had that injury cut season, his final season. Maybe it would be in a big learning curve to kind of go into not so much a college based offense with the dink and dunk passing that they had at Tennessee. But he was not ready whatsoever for any of these games. And if you cannot go ahead and have, some of these starts or backup duties where you can't even put together, 40 yards passing, you can't even sustain drives, you're overthrowing, you're not getting your feet set. Some of the most quarterback basics, quarterback 101 stuff, he's either putting too much pressure on himself. He simply was not ready for prime time, in these games. That to me looks like an absolute miss and a bust. Granted, it was not a first round pick or anything like that, and certainly this franchise for us long term Lions fans that have been around the block for a long time, we've certainly missed on our fair share of picks that the stakes were a little bit higher on prior to Hendon Hooker, and I'm sure we'll miss some more after his time too. But he is not anyone you can build around. He's not anyone you can count on. He is not a counted backup. And it's really just quite sad that the guy that we brought in to push him a little bit ended up pushing him out of a job, it looks like.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And it's a situation where, and you've seen it with various players, and this even goes back to the Quinn Trisha regime, how you can't take second round and third round picks and use them as if it works out, great. If not, no big deal. No, you need to hit on your second and your third round picks. Those are supposed to be guys that can step in and make a positive impact for you sooner rather than later. And I think they gave Hendon Hooker probably a little bit longer of a leash than I would have liked. And again, I'm sure they gave him the grace because of that serious injury. But I think at this point, we're, 4 years removed from that injury. And we're in a day and age where these athletes are healing. You were talking about injuries a little while back, Phil, and how guys are getting hurt more than ever before, but they're also healing up faster than ever before. So you got to think that he wouldn't have been ready to go if he wasn't fully healed. So a lot of it was probably more or less once he got his sea legs under him, which again doesn't take very long, a lot of it was probably between his ears. And that's a pretty big hurdle if you can't get that taken care of in a pretty reasonable amount of time. If you're not the guy, you're not the guy. And I think if this preseason taught us anything, that unfortunately, that was, like you said, to borrow a line from you, Phil, swing and miss as far as the hooker pick. And that's a third round pick that it would have been nice to have in your back pocket that they could have used for something that would have made a strong impact on this team. Didn't happen, so we move forward. What is something that you wish you would have seen more of this training camp and preseason that you weren't able to quite see for yourself or get a handle on?
So I think it'll be a couple things. I realize not wanting to get some of these starters hurt a little bit. I think we've been hitting on this, pretty much each show. But what is the Lions' offensive philosophy under John Morton? How is this defense going to look under Kelvin Shepard? Without playing starters, or really without playing guys that would be like number 2 in some spots on the depth chart, where all of a sudden it's just the number 3 on the depth chart is starting, and you go 3, 4, 5, and it's 3, 4, and 5 that are playing, and not 1 and 2. I think it wasn't necessarily that the play calls on either side were vanilla. I just don't think you really have much to hang your head on, and you just as a Lions fan at the end of the day, you still have to believe that the front end of where this roster is at for the 53 man is better than what 95% of the league. But we don't know what the play calls are going to be. We didn't get any ebbs and flows of it, and that was something that was sorely missing. So for me, I would have liked to see at least announce one of these games with 4 games going on. Hey, this is the one where we're going to play like maybe a quarter or a third of our starters, and they're going to go 2 series, and that's it, right? Hopefully, no one got hurt for that or anything. But like, I think 2 series with some mix of starters in there would at least give us a little bit more of an idea, and hope as Lions fans that we just don't have to wait until Green Bay to kind of rip the curtain off and just say, "Hey, here's our team."
And we
So
saw
that's
some
for me.
of that move in the other direction from teams that sort of follow the same pattern as the Lions. Some examples:
Yeah.
the Kansas City Chiefs were always famous for not playing any of their starters. We saw Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and some of the starters
Yeah.
on offense, as well as some of the guys on defense. I think everybody except Chris Jones played over the weekend for a little bit. We saw them in 2 games. So that's a shift in mentality from years past. The Cincinnati Bengals, the same thing. They are under Zach Taylor. I believe they, in the course of weeks 1 and 2, so this is Zach Taylor's 7th year as the coach. So that's 12 games that surpass weeks 1 and week 2. I think he has lost all but 1 game, weeks 1 and week 2, over the course of his 6 years as the Bengals coach. So it's almost like, okay, something's got to give here. They've been one of those teams, too, that weren't playing their starters or their heavy hitters in the preseason. You saw Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and a lot of your big guns on offense get into every preseason game except, I believe, the one over the weekend. So your first 2, they were seeing pretty reasonable amounts of
Yeah.
action, not just one drive and that's it. They were out there for a few possessions for those first 2 games. Maybe that's a way to keep them from getting off to those patented slow starts under Zach Taylor. We'll see, but that just goes to show, Phil, that we're not seeing any of that stuff, especially with 2 new coordinators. We don't know who John Morton is still. We don't know if he can call plays at a high level. We saw him a handful of years ago. If you're a football nerd like us, he was the offensive coordinator calling the plays for the Jets a handful of years back. But the Jets and offense over the last 20, 25 years really haven't been synonymous with one another. So that's not really anything that's going to put a whole lot of confidence in me as a Lions fan. You pretty much have to give him an incomplete, more so than a letter grade, for his time with the Jets. As far as Kelvin Shepard goes, it's not necessarily a slam dunk to promote somebody from within that they're going to turn out to be anything as a coordinator. A recent example being the Eagles, when Shane Steichen, their old offensive coordinator, when they went to the Super Bowl a few years back, took the Indianapolis Colts job. They promoted their quarterbacks coach Thomas Brown to be the offensive coordinator, and that was a disaster. I'm not hinting that it's going to be the same scenario with Kelvin Shepard here, but again, we just don't know because we didn't see him calling
Yeah.
plays with guys that are actually going to be out there on that field in week 1 and beyond. So it's almost like we're putting blind faith in the roster that our roster is going to be superior to Team B's roster, and the scheme and the coaching and everything like that's all going to fall into place. And I think you and I have just been watching football for too long to know that
Yeah.
it's more complicated than that.
It's just really disappointing. Again, not to harp on it. As a Lions season ticket holder, these preseason games mean absolutely nothing. There's so much more in stock in these joint practices, but again, it's like it's limited to the beat writers and reporters that are out there on like Tuesdays and Wednesdays when everyone's working. There's a limited amount of videos, so you can't even really watch anything. It's by design. They don't want this stuff to get out necessarily outside of the people that are there. And, I think that's where the teams really kind of gain stock of where they're at. And we just don't have access to any of that during the preseason. So here we are. We're approaching cut day, and we'll talk about our cuts and things like that. But again, it's just based on preseason games that, for the most part, were fairly uninteresting and just didn't give us much to give, with maybe an exception of one player who seemed to kind of rise to the occasion that I'm sure we'll talk about in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, for sure. And like we talked about on last week's episode, Phil, the problem I have with these joint practices is that they're in controlled environments. The coaches
Yeah.
are all standing around. They're able to step in and blow the whistle if they see something they don't like. And of course, the contact isn't the same as what you're going to see. The timing isn't the same as what you're going to see. So, yeah, you're having the ones going against the ones, and everyone's out there having a good time and able to, lay a hit on somebody that isn't one of their own teammates and all that, but you still have the quarterbacks wearing the red jerseys and all this. Again, the contact is limited, and it's in no way indicative of how things are going to go week 1.
Yeah.
And I understand that's kind of the way things have gone, and it's probably as the NFL schedule inevitably moves to that 18-game schedule like they keep dropping hints at, that is going to affect the preseason. And I'm sure we are going to see these joint practices sort of becoming the lay of the land as far as that goes. But you pointed out, Phil, that doesn't really instill a whole lot of confidence to Lions fans of what we're going to see, besides just putting blind faith again that our roster is better than Team B's roster. Now, I think I knew where you were going with that, Phil. You were dropping a little bit of a hint there. I think there's no question what we all were surprised or appreciative of what we all discovered or ran into as Lions fans as a result of this preseason.
Yeah, so we talked about Hendon Hooker, and if his stock was, think of some sort of stock that just absolutely plummeted. Went from $300 a share to a penny stock, $1 a share, or something like that. Isaac Tesla came in, and my goodness, did he have himself a preseason. The fact that he scored a touchdown, I want to say maybe not the Hall of Fame game, but every other game, or
Yeah.
at least had a big impression. A lot of times his connection with Kyle Allen, especially these last couple of games, really proved to be pretty fruitful. He had an amazing touchdown against the Texans over the weekend. That one, I think, is probably going to be a Sports Center top 10 play. He did the worm after it, really endearing himself to Lions fans, to where all of a sudden, I've, not to say we listen to other places, but we do, sure, right? So on sports radio, of course, one of the topics over the weekend has been, now that we have a good idea about Isaac Tesla, is he the long-term number 2 with Amon-Ra St. Brown if we get into a salary cap crunch where we have to extend a bunch of guys, and we've started extending a bunch of guys, but we simply cannot afford everyone, that we have to let Jameson Williams go. That's where his stock is at, that people think he is a bona fide potential long-term number 2 receiver. And to be fair, this is one of those plays that we both thought Brad Holmes was kind of crazy when he made. Our knowledge base of Arkansas football and the Arkansas passing game, let alone Isaac Tesla's whole story, about growing up on the west side of the state, playing in that small college football environment in D2 and transferring over. And all of a sudden, it looks like the Lions could have a blossoming, young, promising player that, you're not going to escape comparisons, but people have thrown Puka Nakua out there. So got to be careful with that kind of stuff, expecting that right away. But he definitely looks like a find. And if you were going to say at least one positive in the preseason, it starts and I think almost ends with Isaac Tesla.
Yep, no doubt about that. So, Phil, as we said, the next biggest issue to tackle, no pun intended, between now and the start of the regular season is roster cutdown. So, of course, as many of our loyal listeners know, they have changed things over the last few years. Instead of doing incremental cut downs little by little over the course of the preseason, they're now keeping the entire training camp roster intact until the preseason is over, and then everybody gets cut at once, and then we have a 53-man roster from whatever you started off with, and that's it. So what we're going to do, just like how we did last year, if you were listening to us on our last year's episode at this point in August of 2024, we're going to try and simulate this roster cutdown on our own. So I came up with 41, in my mind, no doubt about it, players that are going to fill the roster. The other 12 players, I've got no idea. So I think you and I are going to agree on a lot of these 41.
Okay.
And then beyond that, you and I are going to have to put our heads together and try and come up with a consensus and figure out what this 53-man roster is going to look like. That way, when you and I take the air next weekend, we'll see how close we were. And I know it's not going to be 100%. I think when we did last year's, it actually did surprise me how few we actually got right in the grand scheme of things. So we'll just have to wait and see. So we'll start with the easy one, Phil. We'll do our special teamers first. So I think you and I are in complete agreement that our kicker, punter, long snapper battery is going to be Jake Bates, Jack Fox, Hogan Hatton. No doubt about that, right?
That is correct. Yeah, I can't say I'm so skilled up on the snapping game, but I think Hogan Hatton has done a serviceable job, and he can stay with the other two for now.
I mean, hey, you can't bring Don Muehlbach out of mothballs at this point, right? So
probably not. I think he's like 53. So yeah.
I think he was there when Steve Mariucci was the head coach in the mid 2000s.
Right.
So
Jeff Garcia years, right?
Yeah. Eesh. Fun times. All right, let's go to the offense. We spent a little bit of time earlier in the last handful of minutes talking about this, but the quarterback room. Jared Goff, your unquestioned starter. I think Kyle Allen has done enough this preseason to solidify himself as the backup. I know that we maybe dropped a little bit of hints of, do you see what's behind curtain number 2, and talk about bringing somebody else in as the backup. I think aside from a few sloppy drives here and there, Kyle Allen has done enough to be the Lions' backup quarterback heading into this year. And that's where it kind of ends for me. Any thoughts on your end, Phil, what the Lions do behind Jared Goff?
Kyle Allen is the number 2 right now. And I think the only consideration you would have is, where is this roster? And is it a case of the coaches know things that we don't with Hendon Hooker? Is there something that is preventing him from playing? Because that would be the only reason why, at this point, you wouldn't cut him and have him potentially trying to get to the practice squad. I don't think he showed anything in the preseason to where a team is going to go ahead and claim him. Outside of maybe the Tennessee Titans, with him playing in the state of Tennessee and maybe being a popular player down there or something like that, I don't think he has any appeal to make a team with how poor he played. I think 2 is the number, and if you're going with 2, of course, it will be Kyle Allen. So in full agreement there with you.
Yep, I do not have Hendon Hooker making this roster, and I know that more teams are starting to get further away from keeping 3 quarterbacks on the roster, since they now have like the
Yeah.
emergency rover quarterback that you're able to at least have on hand just in case of an emergency. I don't think teams are keeping 3 quarterbacks on the rosters like they once did. And to kind of put a bow on Hendon Hooker, I think, if my memory serves me right, he did not throw for any touchdowns this preseason. He turned the ball over way more than anybody would have liked him to. I think he put the ball on the ground twice that resulted in turnovers. He threw 3 interceptions. And I think when you factor in all of his runs that went for 10 yards or longer, he was also sacked for a 5-yard loss or greater an equal amount of times. So
Yeah.
I definitely did not see enough to warrant the Lions using a roster spot on him. Goff and Allen, you and I are in agreement, are going to be the quarterbacks on the roster. Let's go to the running backs. You have David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, and in my mind, Craig Reynolds as your no doubt about it. What are your thoughts as far as the running back room goes beyond what I have there?
Yeah, I think those are the 3 that will make this team undoubtedly. You know, Craig Reynolds is an interesting case because he clearly does not have the physical gifts that the other 2 have, but he is a really, really great player to have on special teams. He is some guy that if he is actually on the playing field and not on the sidelines, he's going to give it your all. I really don't want too many scenarios, if I'm being honest, where Craig Reynolds is the guy in the backfield. That's my only little concern, I guess, with having Reynolds as your number 3 and not maybe like a number 4. Sione Vaki, the draft pick from a year ago, is hurt at the moment. I would probably still throw him on this team to make it, but as he's hurt, that will also free up another spot at the moment.
So what are you hearing as far as his injury goes? Do you think it's even worth putting him on like the PUP list or anything like that? Or do you think this is somewhat minor in nature? Because this is a guy who the team is fairly high on, but I don't think any of us have seen it yet. It's more been an idea as far as a reality goes. So do you think a guy like Vaki is a guy that you use one of these 12 up for grabs roster spots on?
I think you can. I think you would, because he still offers a ton of versatility. Special teams like him and Reynolds are obviously going to play a good deal of that instead of actually getting some, any meaningful actual play. The big thing with him, though, is he's had a case of nagging injuries. He will be injured to start the season. It sounds like it might just take a couple weeks and he'll be back here at some point. So it's not like a season ender. He's not going to go on the PUP list or anything like that we know of. So, he should still be able to contribute. Definitely don't cut him. I think he's more talented than trying to, free up a spot for someone else or anything like that. So,
so you're comfortable putting him on the roster?
I'm comfortable putting him on the roster just because I think if you want to be that elite team still, I think you do need some guys that can have an elite contribution on special teams. Him as a gunner, him, working some things on special teams. I think that's the kind of guy you want.
Okay, no disagreement for me on that one. Let's go to the wide receiver group. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, Khalif Raymond, Tim Patrick, and Isaac Tesla. Do you have all 5 of those guys in your wide receiver room?
Yeah, I guess just the biggest question is amongst those 5 is after 1 and 2, where do they stack? Has Isaac Tesla proved enough to be a number 3? Is Tim Patrick still going to be ahead of him? Is Khalif Raymond still going to be ahead of him? I think this is going to be one of the interesting stories kind of heading into week 1 with how much did Isaac Tesla prove that he deserves minutes, he deserves snaps kind of early on in the season. I think he's going to get there, and I think he's going to get them eventually. But I think it's still, at this point, Tim Patrick and Khalif Raymond being the vets in the room, they're still going to probably get their fair share of snaps as well when they go in 3 and 4 wide receiver sets.
And this is where it gets difficult, like you mentioned, Phil, with these joint practices. All we've seen is Isaac Tesla developing some level of a rapport with Kyle Allen. We hope with every fiber of our being that in a regular season outing, that's not going to be the case. We want to know what his connection is becoming with Jared Goff, and we just haven't seen that. You have these joint practices where Jared Goff is throwing passes to Isaac Tesla, but we have not seen any of these, so we don't know what their building connection is like. So what I'm left to assume is that there's still more that needs to take place in that development of the connection between the rookie wideout and the veteran quarterback. So until then, I think that you are going to see more Khalif Raymond and more Tim Patrick, at least initially, and then have Tesla in there for maybe some more gadget plays or some more razzle dazzle or something like that. But I've been proven wrong before. Do you have anybody that stands out to you outside of those five that you think deserves a spot? You thinking like Jackson Meeks or the Lovett kid
So
who they
yeah,
drafted as well, and any of those guys stick out to you? I'm not sold on either of them, but I can be convinced.
so I guess that's kind of where it's going to be interesting because I feel like for either of them, you might be able to get a mid-season replacement for either of them that, or a vet or someone like that that could be a better fit for this team and what they want. I think with Dominic Lovett, we drafted him in the seventh round. I think his speed gives him a little bit of versatility on special teams. Jackson Meeks is a bigger receiver. Lions already have, bigger receivers with Tim Patrick and Tesla. And of course, it would appear that Dominic Lovett is basically Khalif Raymond in younger form. So that's where it's going to get a little interesting. I kind of want to put a bow on the five for right now that we would have. Let's see where we kind of stack up with the other positions and circle back because I think either of them could have a shot still. I guess I would lean towards Lovett just again for that special teams versatility as some guy that can get down and make a tackle with his speed and things like that on special teams over Meeks at this point. But Meeks, again, if it wasn't Tesla, he was probably the second best story in the preseason as well. So there could be a place for him
Yeah,
as well.
and Lovett got all the hype at the start of preseason, but we
Yeah.
saw more from Meeks. It's almost like we expected to see more from Lovett. We didn't. Meeks sort of took advantage and
Yeah.
was making more of a case to make this roster. So I'm not going to pencil anybody in outside of the five until we maybe get to the end of it and realize, hey, we're still looking to fill a few more spots. But right now, I'm willing to stand pat on the five
Yeah.
receivers and then just see how things go.
Yeah. Sounds good.
To the tight ends, we have Sam Laporta and Brock Wright as the no doubt about it. Do you put a Shane Zylstra in there as tight end number 3, or is carrying two tight ends kind of the way to go here? What are you thinking?
So that's the thing. I again, it's kind of one of those things. I want to see where we stack up on defense with some of the names about who are making the team. Those two are no doubters, surefires. I think Shane Zylstra, he's got familiarity. If you want to have three in there, but how many three tight end packages do we really have? So he's going to be one of those guys that essentially is going to be on the roster, but will always be one of the guys who will not be dressed. That will be one of those scratches that you would have just because I don't think there's a ton of room for Shane to get playing time because you're never really going to see a three tight end set unless it's a special team snap or something like that typically. So I don't think any of the other guys that they threw in preseason really did much to impress me.
No.
So maybe you bring one of the two of them back on a practice squad notice, but they're certainly not making the team.
And again, hard to tell what we're going to be looking at as far as packages go because we don't know what John Morton likes to do just yet. We didn't see enough from him to know if carrying a third tight end makes sense with what his play calling. All we have to go off of is what Ben Johnson did. And as far as we're concerned as fans and podcasters, that's completely irrelevant to the situation at hand right now.
Yeah.
On to the offensive line we go. The unquestioned members of the O-line, Taylor Decker, Christian Mahogany, Graham Glasgow, Tate Ratledge, the rookie, Penei Sewell. That's probably going to be your starting unit if I had to make that assertion here today. For some depth, I think Coyote Awasika is a surefire depth piece. Dan Skipper, surefire depth piece. And I'm even willing to throw Giovanni Manu in there. He did get some consistent reps over the course of the preseason and training camp. He does serve a need, especially with the long-term injury to Colby Sorsdahl, who served in that role over the last couple of seasons. I think maybe Manu's a guy you take a chance on for some offensive tackle depth heading into the season. What about you, Phil, as far as what you're thinking as far as the offensive line goes?
That's probably about as good as it would be for right now. I think the biggest thing is just, would you feel comfortable if Decker or Sewell, one of them gets a little light injury, going to miss a couple series in a game, that you can have Giomano out there and not lose a series, because of a penalty, not lose a series because of a situation where they're getting beat on the outside all the time, right? So that's the problem that they have. I think a more concerning issue right now with that offensive line as well. Graham Glasgow has, been injured here towards the end of training camp. How is that going to factor in, with some things as well? I think the offensive line, we know who the starters are going to be once we get going. I think they need more depth here. And I'm going to actually pivot for a second because I know we haven't quite talked about defense and everything like that. If I was Brad Holmes, I would try to secure some backup offensive linemen, some people that, hey, maybe they're not the best offensive linemen in the world, but guys that you would feel comfortable starting a game or two. Not every team is going to offer those up, but look to see what teams have a little bit more depth out there, because Graham Glasgow, I think, is really key to how this offensive line is going to function. And if he is already starting to get hurt and we're going to have to lean on these, the rookie with Ratledge, and then, of course, with Mahogany so much early on, that is a recipe for a lot of issues up front and center to Jared Goff and kind of getting this offense going. So, we'll see. Obviously, there's a lot of defensive ends that are out there that have been making some noise about wanting some contracts and stuff. But yeah, if I was Brad Holmes, we're finishing this roster off, and then I'm trying to see who I can get in for additional help on the line.
And it is important to point out that we do have some guard depth that we haven't been able to see in action. That's Miles Frazier. He's missed the entire training camp and is probably going to start the season on the PUP list, which means we won't see him for at least the first 4 games. You hope to get him back at some point, but it's nothing that we can pencil into the roster at this point, because just based on the fact we have not seen him all training camp long, you're just not going to use one of your roster spots on that at this point. You're listening to this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progar chopping it up with Phil Byrne. Thrilled you could be along with us as we put a bow on the 2025 NFL preseason and try and predict what the Lions' 53-man roster is going to be. We have to have that in place by this coming Tuesday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we currently are in a pretty good state of agreement with the Lions offense and the special teamers. We have 24 guys that are, in our minds, set in stone, going to be on this roster. That still leaves us with some work to do. We got 29 more roster spots to fill, and I think a lot of them are going to be pretty self-explanatory, but I think we're going to have to put our heads together and come to more of a consensus on some of these defenders, just because it's not, again, as cut and dry and obvious as the offense. So let's jump back on the bus, Phil. We are going to start off with the defensive line. So pretty safe to say Aiden Hutchinson, after suffering the severe season-ending injury, is going to be back and better than ever for 2025. He'll be on the edge along with Marcus Davenport. DJ Reader and the rookie Tyleek Williams are going to be your defensive tackles. And this is a me thing, Phil. I think based on what we saw last year in the spot duties based on the injuries, as well as what we've seen in preseason this year, I think Al-Qadim Muhammad has done enough to get a, in my mind, guaranteed roster spot on this defensive line. And that's where it ends for me, Phil. Well, I got 5 names. What are you looking at as far as your defensive line, how that looks?
Yeah, so I would add Pat O'Connor to that list as well. I think having some more flexibility in there again. We won't have a Lee McNeil until around Thanksgiving time. DJ Reader getting up there in age. We're going to need some D tackles. I would also probably say that they brought in Roy Lopez from Arizona. Didn't really play a ton in the preseason. He might be a little bit more of that kind of third defensive tackle right off the rip to kind of give these guys a little bit more rep, splitting some time with O'Connor in some areas right there. I think one guy though that if we're closing the book on Hendon Hooker, I'll also kind of throw into this mix as well that um, I don't believe should make the roster. Again, I'm not trying to be negative Nancy or say anyone should not deserve a shot at playing in the NFL. I think Broderick Martin. I don't think it's working here.
No.
He has been given more than enough time. He wasn't a super high pick. He was a project. That project didn't work out. There's plenty of guys that would fight and claw to be on a championship roster and team like the Lions have. And I think he just did not have nearly the hustle that I think that spot would reserve there. So D tackles, I think he got plenty in there. Al-Quadain Mohammed, I think is going to be making this team as well as we kind of mentioned with Davenport and Hutch. It seems like we don't have a lot because Josh Pascal is hurt.
Yep, not going to see him.
He will be. It's not going to see him. Of course, Levi Onwuzurike, he's out for the year. He's on that final year as well. So,
of course, we won't see Lee McNeil until at least Thanksgiving.
So not part of the 53 or anything like that. I talked about maybe trading for an offensive lineman. Vince, we've said this till we're blue in the face. Where does the Zadarius Smith talk start? Because we're through training camp. It's pretty apparent that we're going to have a little bit of depth issue on defensive end with the way that things are going. Of course, Ahmad Hassanain as well, the rookie out of Boise State, I think would be a shoo-in to make this team. He is also hurt as well. So they are really banged up along that defensive line, which is not the precedent we really wanted to start the season. I think you got to bring Zadarius in. Bring him in on that rookie, or not rookie, but the veteran minimum, and kind of go from there.
I think not to exhume old bodies or anything like that, but the Cincinnati Bengals have made it known that they are going to answer the phone if you call up with trade offers for Trey Hendrickson.
Yeah. Hendrickson and Hutchinson. I mean, listen, I think it would be fantastic. He has the familiarity. We just like every other team in the NFL, we need some help on the depth on offensive line and defensive line right now. And I don't know what the negotiating is going to be. Whether or not he would be willing to play ball to, make it easier to sign him long term or, a new contract and things like that. Because at some point, there's only so much money you've got. That would be my main concern. But yeah, he technically is still out there. The Bengals are a little bit of a mess of a franchise still. So,
well, and we know Trey Hendrickson is at least somewhat available.
Yeah.
There's still the elephant in the room is Micah Parsons, and it doesn't look like anything is anywhere close to getting done as far as that goes. It seems like there was a body language issue that needs to be nipped in the bud from the preseason game over the weekend that, it just doesn't seem like that stalemate is anywhere obviously about to end, but the Cowboys have not made it known that he's available. So they still think that they're going to get a deal done in the 11th hour, and that's their business. But you've got Zadarius Smith that's available. You have Trey Hendrickson that's available for the right price. So we'll just have to wait and see for the purpose of our exercise here, though, Phil, just using the players that we know we already have in-house. What about like a Nate Lynn or something like that? A guy that we saw a little bit last year, we've saw in this preseason. Do you take a chance on him for some edge depth, or am I just grasping at straws here?
Yeah, I think so. Again, that will depend on, is he a guy that you think you can move back to the practice squad? I don't think he's a guy that will have a ton of rotation, a ton of snaps once the season actually gets going. But is he a guy that, let's say you do bring in a Zadarius Smith and maybe you do make that trade for Trey Hendrickson and, everyone's going nuts about this team again. Um, Maybe that's one that you are able to kind of have that flexibility with the practice squad. Um, I think some of the people though, especially on that D tackle spot, some other guys that I think are probably going to be cut as well. We had like a Miles Adams. I don't think he's making the team. Makai Wingo, he's a D tackle. We did
Is
draft him
he
out of
hurt?
LSU. I barely saw him in the preseason. I think he's been banged up. I don't think he's been like a scratch or anything.
Because
Um,
ideally, he's a guy you would like to have penciled in
yeah.
there if he's healthy. I just thought he was hurt, and that's why he wasn't on my no doubt about it list. So obviously, we're
So
doing we're doing this in real time. I'm not going to pause our podcast for me to start researching Makai Wingo here, but he's definitely a guy that you would like to have out there if he is healthy enough.
yeah, so he's been banged up, but it sounds like kind of the latest injury situation is that he would probably just be like a questionable to play kind of situation. It looks like he was just kind of working through that kind of stuff, but apparently he was playing through a lot of the practices and joint practices, but they just didn't get him on the field that much. But it wasn't like he was some guy that wasn't going to necessarily make the team. So I think you would pencil in Makai Wingo to a defensive tackle spot. So real quick here as we're going through it, let's run through our defensive tackles that we would have making it, Vince, and then we'll get to the defensive ends and kind of figure out how many we've got on the defensive line here. We have DJ Reader, we have Tyleek Williams. I thought Pat O'Connor and Roy Lopez were also good in the mix at D tackle. I would also throw in Makai Wingo. We're obviously cutting Miles Adams and Broderick Martin. Chris Smith and Keith Cooper Jr. also getting cut.
Who?
Right. Good luck at Lowe's.
Yeah.
Let's see here. And
And
then we
and as you're
have
and as you're transitioning before you transition into the
yeah.
edge, I did receive confirmation that Makai Wingo has been activated off the pup list in the last 4 days. So
Okay.
so he should be good to go in the next 2 weeks. Whether he's out there for the majority of the snaps actually remains to be determined, but just for depth, it does look like the Lions will have him as part of that equation.
And of course, you have Adam Schefter on speed dial, so that's how we were able to get that so quick.
Absolutely.
Wondering that in there. So that's five, and then we had at least four as of right now that would make the DN. So it would be Hutch, Davenport, Al-Quadain Mohammed, and Nate Lynn. So DNs with a couple of the injuries not looking so great. Of course, we'd have Pascal and Ahmed Hassanein injured to start the season, so that won't count against who actually makes the roster. You would probably go ahead and take either of those guys over Nate Lynn, in a full healthy situation. Isaac Ukwu, um, not making the team
I
on the
wouldn't
DN
think
spot.
so either. So that's 9 guys on the defensive
Yeah.
line. So that takes us to 33 guys on the roster total that we're in agreement on. So let's move into the linebackers. Again, we're in a little bit more of a toss up on some of these guys. So I think your surefires for the linebacking core are Alex Anzalone, Jack Campbell, Derek Barnes going to be good to go to start the season. I personally liked what I saw from Grant Stewart over the course of this preseason. Again, we weren't able to see a whole lot. I did see him make probably more good plays on defense, aside from putting the ball on the ground on the kickoff
Yeah.
return, the very, very first play of the Hall of Fame game. Beyond
Yeah.
that, at his usual position of linebacker, I saw some good things. And then factoring in, again, special teams and just spot duty, I think Anthony Pittman's a guy who's at least been part of the equation for long enough. He understands the lay of the land. A guy you're not going to see out there in high leverage spots, but again, just for depth on the defense and special teams, I think Anthony Pittman's a guy you at least think of. What's your linebacking core looking like, Phil, from my surefires to yours and beyond?
So you've got your starting three, and then you kind of want to figure out who would be in the backup roles and who would be depth after outside of that. Malcolm Rodriguez, of course, is hurt, so he would make the team. Had he been healthy, you
He'll be a
threw
long
in,
shot for at any point this season, it sounds like.
yeah. So again, think about him next year, but it's not like we're cutting him to, make the practice squad or anything
He'll
like
just
that.
go right to IR.
So you had Pittman. I guess the other guy that I would throw in there possibly is another guy that I would stick around with the team. Trevor Nowaski. I think he did plenty good in the preseason. From what I could tell, him and Stewart were really the only two guys on defense, making a solid worth of plays. The secondary just got torched. There was no pass rush. It just seemed like these two guys were just making tackles all over the place. I think he's got some familiarity being in with the team from last year too, especially the injuries we had. So I'd feel comfortable with running Nowaski back there.
And I would agree with that. We did see him quite a bit last season. Again, we're looking for familiarity and consistency, and I think
Yeah.
that sort of gives the linebacking core just that. So that gives us 6 linebackers. So that is a total of 39 roster spots that we have solidified. We've got 14 more to go, so we're going to have to maybe branch out a little bit once we get through the secondary and see what might be
Boom.
missing here.
No, Brian Branch is making the team, folks, but
Yeah.
you were leaning in defensive back. So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So let's go into the secondary. So we have the no doubt about it DJ Reed, Terrion Arnold, Amik Robertson, Khalil Dorsey, and Rock Yassin as your corners. I think those 5 are in pretty safe territory, especially with Rakestraw being on the IR. He won't be a factor this season. I think those are your 5 that you're at least getting started with. Your thoughts beyond that?
So you went with Rock Sin. I know there was some talk about Avante Maddox maybe possibly sliding in there. He is a vet. He is a guy that's been around. I think those two guys, being that fifth cornerback, are a little interchangeable. But I think no doubt about it, the first 3 set in stone. And to be honest, I think even if Ennis Rakestraw was healthy, I'm not so sure he would beat out Amik Robertson at this point, the way that he came on late in the season. So yeah, Khalil Dorsey kind of being your number 4, and then Rock Yassin in that scenario. So potentially, I guess I would consider Avante Maddox as that next guy, because he has a little bit of versatility, also being able to play safety too.
So it is worth noting, Phil, and I didn't want to jump over top of you while you're giving your explanation. I do have Avante Maddox on this roster, but I do have him jumping over to safety.
Okay.
So
Yep.
he will, in my mind, be a part of this roster along with the other safeties on this list of Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch. So in my mind, we still have some work to do as far as filling out this secondary, because they're going to need a little bit more in the secondary, or the back end of the secondary, if you will, down the middle, besides Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, and Avante Maddox, who's going to be doing some hop over duty at safety. So where do we go from here is, I guess, the question with the rest of the secondary.
So let's go ahead and go through the names, Vince, and you decide which name makes the team.
Dun,
We
dun.
have Lauren Strickland. We have is it Luke or Luck? Luck? Barku?
Who?
Sorry, Rip. Alan George, which sounds like a former CEO of Microsoft.
Yeah.
I do not know who that is. DJ Miller, Tyson Russell, Nick Whiteside, Eric Hallett, Ian Kennelly, and of course the aforementioned who got hurt in that Atlanta game, Maurice Norris. Or Maurice Norris. Is it Maurice? I think it's
Maurice. So,
Yeah.
so here's my question. It sounds like Norris is simply in concussion protocol. It doesn't sound like
Yeah.
he's looking at anything super long term. Once he clears protocol, I got to think he's going to be good to go. He is a guy that we saw on a handful of occasions last season. We saw him in the playoffs. So, assuming he clears concussion protocol, Phil,
Would he be your fourth safety?
do you think he's one of your safeties? What do you think?
So I guess just the case would be, would you go with him, or I would have to say Lauren Strickland would probably be the
He's
the
a
other
guy
one.
that made the final roster last season
Yeah.
as one of the
Yeah.
the keepers. Do you keep them both?
So this is where it's unfortunate because we had Dan Jackson, who we drafted out of Georgia. He has a season-ending injury that
Yep.
I think this was why you drafted him, was to kind of push for that fourth safety spot. So I guess I'm gonna go Norris because he's got some experience, and God forbid something were to happen to Branch or Kirby that, they'd have to miss a game or something. I guess they would feel a little bit better about having Norris back there than Strickland.
So let's pencil Norris in there as far as that goes.
So what's our grand total at now?
So that puts us at 9 defensive backs.
Okay.
So I'm doing some quick math on the fly here. So that still puts us at 42. So I think we've come to agreement on 42 names between the offense, the defense, and the special teams. That still leaves 11 guys unaccounted for. And I'm looking up and down this roster right here, Phil, and
This is why the
nobody's
season
screaming
was
at me
terrible.
here.
Yeah,
Exactly.
these guys did not stand out.
So
Yeah.
how does that? I understand they have to trim the rosters down, but like at what point, like over the next 48 hours, are we going to start seeing a bevy of moves by other teams? And maybe some of those other spots are filled by guys who aren't currently part of the Lions roster. I mean, is that somewhat of a possibility here?
Well, because I think the other thing that you lean into is like, think about how that conversation we just had with safety. Whereas at wide receiver, for instance, like I'm looking at the wide receiver room, I think we weren't really sure what to do after Isaac Tesla. Maybe you bring Dominic Lovett and Jackson Meeks. Do you bring them both back? Do you have one spot for two guys? Because other than that, it looks like we're also going to be cutting, Tom Kennedy for what, the 25th time. Ronnie Bell, the former Michigan product, we'd be cutting as well. Tight end, we weren't super sold on Shane Zylstra. We had two. So I think that's where you start to make up some of the moves. I think still it is very strange to me looking at like defensive end that we really only have like four outside of the injured guys right now. So to me, it almost seems like to get to 53, they might have to let some of these other teams make some initial cuts and just bring some guys in and kind of see what happens, in the days leading up to Lambeau.
So I don't believe in cheating, if you will. So when we do these exercises, this is all stuff that we do off the top of our heads. We're not leaning
Yeah.
into anybody else with how they do it. Now, just for the sake of checking our work, if you will, ESPN just over the weekend did their roster projections. So, as part of us trying to maybe solidify things a little bit, maybe we can try and check our work up against theirs and then see if we're right or they're
Sure.
right, maybe try and find somewhere in the middle. So we'll go down the list. Quarterbacks, they're in full agreement with us. They're going to keep two quarterbacks, Kyle Allen and Jared Goff. Running backs, they're in agreement with us as well with what we decided. Montgomery, Gibbs, Reynolds, and Baki as your running backs. So that's 6. We only agreed to keep 5 wide receivers, Phil. ESPN has the Lions projecting to keep 7. And we decided to leave Dominic Lovett and Jackson Meeks off the roster altogether. ESPN actually predicts Lovett and Meeks to both make the 53-man roster. So I guess we'll have to wait and see on that one.
So I guess my only question would be if you have 7 receivers make this team, does that mean that Khalif Raymond doesn't do as much on special teams if you're then trying to leverage Dominic Lovett and Jackson Meeks? Like, is he a true fourth wideout then? Or like that's the thing that when you're trying to do like this roster math, that's a little interesting, I guess.
I guess the thing that I need to remember as we're doing this, though, is that not all 53 guys are going to make the game day active roster. So you're
True.
probably looking at a scenario where Lovett and Meeks, let's say for just scenario purposes, are going to be your inactives unless you start to see the receiver depth take a little bit of a hit, God forbid, or injuries or whatever the case may be. I imagine that the receiver number 6 and receiver number 7 will be
Yeah.
your inactives. But I just don't know if I'm ready to put 7 guys on this 53-man roster at wideout. So if you don't have any pull one way or the other, I think we just continue to move
Keep
on to
on.
the next
Yeah.
position group. That takes us to the tight ends. We're in agreement with Sam Laporta and Brock Wright. ESPN has them keeping Shane Zylstra as the 3rd tight end. I can see that happening.
Yeah. I
For,
wouldn't be opposed to it if we're trying to make up. Yeah, we'll have Zylstra make it because realistically, there's no reason why we would ever have Laporta on special teams at this point.
Yep, absolutely. So I can see us penciling Zylstra in there just for a consistency's sake. We had 8 offensive linemen as far as our agreement, Phil. ESPN has 9 offensive linemen. So we were in agreement on Decker, Glasgow, Sewell, Mahogany, Ratledge, Skipper, Manu, and Awasika. ESPN, the extra name they gave was Jamarco Jones. And I'm going to be honest with you, Phil, as a guy who watches his fair share of Lions and then some, I couldn't tell you who Jamarco Jones was if he delivered a pizza to my house.
So from basically the 2 games that I watched, there were 2 games I just had things going on and caught some highlights here and there. He didn't look particularly good. But if you're keeping 9 and he's some guy that's just break glass in case of emergency,
And you can't
let's
keep
hope we're
Miles
not breaking
Frazier.
that glass.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So sure, I guess.
All right. Jamarco Jones is on our roster. Let's head over to the defense. We predicted that 9 defensive linemen would make the roster. ESPN's taken that a step further and giving us 10. Hutchinson, Reeder, Davenport, Roy Lopez, Tyleek Williams, Hassanin, Al-Qadim Muhammad, Nate Lynn, Makai Wingo. So where we start to disagree a little bit is on some of those depth pieces. They have Ahmed Hassanin making the roster, which it sounds like it's a more serious injury than just, hey, he's going to miss a few games. So why would you dedicate a roster spot to him? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I'm going to just strike that from the record. We also see Broderick Martin on there. I think you and I are both in pretty sharp disagreement as far as that goes. I think Broderick Martin's been given every opportunity in the world.
Yeah,
no. it just isn't meant to be. So I think you and I are actually in a pretty good place with our defensive lineman that we selected, and I'm comfortable keeping it just at the 9 and calling it a day. Linebackers, we are also in agreement with ESPN of keeping 6. However, the actual 6 that we agreed upon are a little bit different. So Campbell, Anzalone, Barnes, Nowaski, Stewart, they have Zach Cunningham being kept instead of Anthony Pittman. Again, can't really pull too many of the plays off the Zach Cunningham highlight reel over the course of this preseason, unless I'm just too wrapped up in baby prep to be pulling sharply in that direction.
I mean, Zach Cunningham, like he did have the most tackles in a year, a couple years back. So I mean, he's been productive, but at this point in time, when he joined the Lions, I thought he was fairly over the hill for what his contribution level would be. So
yeah, wasn't he the leading tackler on like the Broncos or something like that a handful of
Broncos
years back?
or Titans or some team like that? Yeah, I mean, I didn't really see much of him in the preseason, if I'm being honest. So. I don't know. Maybe we forgot about him.
Okay.
Sure. Congratulations. You got a rose.
You're
going
to
the
team.
Next round of The Bachelor.
Jeez,
yeah.
Okay, now to the corners, Phil. So we are in full agreement with what ESPN projected as far as the corners go, and that is DJ Reed, Terrion Arnold, Amik Robertson, Khalil Dorsey, and Rock Ya-Sin. The safeties are also in agreement with what we chose, Phil. Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph, Avante Maddox. Here's where we differ is we chose Maurice Norris as the safety that they would have as safety number 4. They went with Ian Kennelly. And I could see that being a possibility, and that's only because they wouldn't have had Danny Rogers do a feature piece on him in the Dolphins game if he wasn't somewhat in somebody's plans, right?
Well, yeah, and I mean he is a local product. I think he was from Grand Valley, if memory serves me right. So, to me, he seemed more like a practice squad kind of guy. But,
Right. And do
you
you
know,
need to keep five
what's
safeties?
yeah, what's really the big difference at this point?
And no disagreement as far as the special teamers go. Jake Bates, Jack Fox, Hogan Hatton. I think we did this last year, Phil. I don't think we were able to come to 53 guys undisputedly. I
No,
think we can get the majority of the way there. And I believe, Phil, that a lot of these extra spots are going to wind up going to guys who were not in training camp with the Lions. I'm going to be curious to see how many guys they keep around beyond who we agreed upon.
no, I think Zadarius Smith. To me, it feels like it's the obvious move. Looking at where that defensive end room is at, and knowing that, again, it's not going to take any assets to go get him. You can bring him in on a much more team friendly deal than he was playing last year. Maybe the Lions fans, we got to kind of reset our expectations. And yes, Zadarius Smith was an absolute, havoc inducing player when he was with the Packers and Ravens, and did a little bit with us last year. But if he is one of those options in there, I think he would still be a steady improvement over um, Nate Lynn. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah. So the way I see it, Phil, we're at 51. So we have 51.
yeah.
And if you bring in two guys from someplace else, whether it's a Zadarius Smith or somebody else, as depth pieces to get to that 53, I think that's reasonable. And I'm curious to see how we did compared to what the actual roster cutdown is going to be in a couple of days.
Real quick here, final thought that I've got is I would much rather be in the Lions spot with having where this roster is and going with two quarterbacks than a team that is what a 3 hour drive from us along another lake in the Great Lake system in Cleveland, where they're going to potentially have four quarterbacks make the team. And the old adage is, of course, if you got two quarterbacks, you don't have one. Well, if you've got four quarterbacks, you don't have a single clue of what you're doing. So, listen, I think a lot of Lions fans wanted Hendon Hooker to make this team. I don't think in any case or scenario he is. I think Kyle Allen is going to be Jared Goff's backup at this point. And, if that's our two guys, I'm okay with it at this point.
Last point that I want to touch on, Phil, before we head off here is that I don't know if you saw the Bill Barnwell piece from ESPN about the teams that are most likely to regress. And it's kind of just in the general sense of the word, it's kind of obvious that the Lions would be on that list because who sustains a 15-win campaign year over year? So if you're talking even a 3-game difference, let's say you go 12-5, that's still in the
Yeah,
eyes
I would
of the
take that.
word regression.
Yeah.
But the one thing I want to highlight from that piece that is kind of lost in the shuffle is the Lions were the most injured unit on defense from any team in the NFL over the last 25 seasons. So it was just in the last quarter century of NFL history, the most banged up unit that we had ever seen. So that's worth noting right there. But on the flip
Yeah.
side, the Lions offense was the healthiest, second healthiest offensive unit over the last 2 seasons. So the Lions were exceptionally healthy on offense, coupled by them being an almost historical level of injured on defense. You got to think that in order for some progression to take place with the defensive injuries, there's going to be some regression on offense to where you just hope it doesn't cancel each other out too much.
Yeah, and I think we've gotten accustomed to being a team that can score 28 points We don't have an idea of what John Morton's, play calling rapport is going to be like. As Lions fans, are we going to be comfortable if we're winning, but we're winning 14-10, 17-10 kind of games? That's something that we'll have to get used to.
All right, that is all she wrote on this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Phil, that was a fun hour plus doing some good Lions chit-chat with you.
Life is not a Madden game, and there's a reason why Vince and myself are not general managers or coaches in the NFL. That's actually quite hard doing a 53-man roster. So
Yeah, buddy.
We did it.
But a
Our
lot of
best
fun.
we could, at least.
Yep, a lot of fun. And don't forget, holiday weekend coming up. Join us for our season preview of the NFL season coming up next week on Kneecaps for Breakfast. For Phil Byrne across the way, Vince Krogar saying good morning. Go Lions. Forward down the field. Over and out.